Can everybody hear me? Hi, good morning. Before we start, we have not started yet. If you'd be so kind as to sign in at the back table so that we know who's here, we would really appreciate that. Thank you, if you haven't done it already. Okay. Very good. Good morning. This is the time and place for a workshop before the board to discuss and solicit comments regarding, without limitation, Nevada Gaming Commission Regulations 3, 5, 12, 22, 28, and the surveillance standards for non-restricted licensees. Madam Secretary, has the workshop been posted in accordance with open meeting law?
Yes, it has.
Very good, thank you. And with that, Madam Secretary, let's proceed with public comments.
This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members ask questions of the speaker, the time needed to address those questions will not count against the speaker's 3-minute time period. If speakers have any handouts or written copies of verbal comments to provide for the record, please hand them to the enforcement agent in the room.
Very good. Let's first start with Carson City. If there's anyone in Carson City wishing to make a public comment, please step forward to the podium at this time. Seeing none, is there anyone in Las Vegas wishing to make a public comment? If so, please step forward to the podium at this time. Seeing none, that will close our public comment section. Madam Secretary, have regulation comments been posted?
Yes, all public comments received by my office have been posted to the website and are available by the door for those present in Carson City or Las Vegas.
Thank you very much. And with that, Madam Secretary, please read into the record our first item for today.
Your first item today is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission of amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 3.010 regarding, without limitation, evidentiary criteria for determining location suitability near churches, schools, or playgrounds, definitions, applicant statements of suitability, presumptions of sufficient showing, and other matters properly related thereto.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We'll begin with Regulation 3.010. I'd like to ask at this time Senior Deputy Attorney General John Michaela to begin with an affirmative presentation as to this potential reg amendment. Mr. Michaela.
Thank you, Chair Dreitzer. Good morning, Chair Dreitzer, Member Assad, Member Sandal, Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm John Michaela with the Attorney General's Office. Before you today for discussion and possible recommendation to the Commission are proposed changes to Regulation 3.010, which would clarify and streamline Board and Commission consideration of a proposed gaming location located within the immediate vicinity of a church, school, or playground. The draft date of the proposed changes before you today is November 10th, 2025. Clarity is added to Regulation 3.010 through the proposed addition of definitions of church, immediate vicinity, playground, and school. Presently, these terms are undefined in this regulatory section. The proposed changes would add a third enumerated relevant factor to Board and Commission consideration of a proposed gaming location located within the immediate vicinity of a church, school, or playground. The Board and Commission could specifically consider evidence that a local governing body has deemed the location suitable for gaming. The reasoning for this is that a local governing body should have a strong understanding of whether gaming is appropriate at a proposed location. Presently, Regulation 3.010 requires an applicant to provide a sufficient showing of suitability for a proposed location. The proposed changes before you would clarify how an applicant carries this burden. The applicant shall provide either a written statement discussing relevant factors or provide a determination from a local governing body that the proposed location is suitable for gaming. Presently, the regulatory requirements make the easiest path for an applicant to carry its burden of showing suitability for a location, a discussion of the suitability on the record at a public meeting. The proposed changes create a presumption that an applicant makes a sufficient showing of the suitability of a location near a church, school, or playground if the Board and Commission do not discuss the required statement or determination. That is, this proposed presumption would make it easier to place such an item on a consent agenda if appropriate. The draft before you today is for possible recommendation of adoption to the Commission, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michaela. I had a question about the term or the proposed term childcare facility approved by the state or political subdivision. What exactly is that meant to capture? Because there's approved childcare facilities, and then there's any number of things like Kids Quest and other things that are essentially babysitting type facilities. So how would this regulation differentiate between that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Chair. So you're on the one hand, you have I missed that.
So for example, I think it's meant to capture approved childcare facilities. But is it meant to capture other things that are not per se approved childcare facilities by the state? I mean, at some level, they're all approved by the state, but are we differentiating between a childcare facility that would, would be something like, as part of a school or something that is meant to be a daily facility for kids? Or is it something like a Kids Quest, which is, say a couple of hours here and there? Are we differentiating that? And do we need to?
When I wrote this, my thinking was that it would capture all approved childcare facilities. So I'm assuming KidQuest is like a before and after childcare facility. I did intend the way I wrote it to capture that as long as it's approved by the state or a county or a city or something like that. But we can narrow that if you would like.
Yeah, I don't know that it's in thinking about this, that it's meant for something like that. It would be more, an established facility in conjunction with daycare or something like that. I'm not sure how you can make that distinction, but I would want to think about that a little bit.
We could limit it to just the first part. School means a school operated or approved by the state or political subdivision thereof, and just put a period after that. Or we could also add preschool after school. So it could means a school or preschool operated or approved by the state or political subdivision thereof, period. And then we could delete the rest of that sentence and still maintain does not include an institution in which the majority of students are age 18 or older.
Because that was my first question. And then the rest of it certainly looks like immediate vicinity needed to be defined. That looks like that was an issue that was long overdue to define.
Yes, I think over the years, immediate vicinity was really up to the discretion of the agent investigating the matter. If he or she wanted to highlight that, this would make that concrete.
Yeah. And this does, I think from my perspective, establish that the entity in a best position to make this determination is a local governing body, subject to ultimate approval by the control board and then ultimately the commission, but they are in the best position to make that. And if there is a determination from the local body, that should be given a significant amount of deference.
Yes, the way this is drafted, that is the case. And that's why an applicant would either have to provide a statement discussing the relevant factors, or in the alternative, that determination from the local governing body. I think that shows that it carries a significant amount of weight.
And this takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. It's a presumption that can be based upon that statement. So I appreciate that. Very good. Board members, any questions for Mr. Michaela?
Thank you, Chairman Dreitzer. I don't have any particular questions. I'd just like to reserve the opportunity to speak after I've heard from our constituents.
Very good. Member Sendall.
Yeah, thank you, Doug Michaela. I had one question on the playground definition, kind of in the same light with the school. Playground means an outdoor area with equipment provided for children to play. I feel like that should probably have some parameters as far as some sort of county, city, municipality, established recreation center or play area. I don't know. I feel like there's something that we could use that would limit that scope of that term there. That would be my thought.
We could add something along the lines of an outdoor area operated by a public or maintained by public governmental entity. Although if you do that, you could be excluding parks that are provided by things like homeowners associations and things like that. But we can make that limitation.
Yeah, I just want to kind of think that through a little bit, because I was just thinking about different outdoor play areas and kind of in the same regard with the school definition and ensuring we're capturing what we mean to capture, not what we don't mean to capture, and kind of the purpose of this. I mean, to your point, any sort of maintained or organized, identified outdoor, recreational play area designated for children, just some sort of language that makes it a little bit more formal. So it can't be something that just pops up in unofficially, I guess, would be my thought or concern, because an HOA having a play area, generally, I don't think we'd have many issues with as far as locations for restricted locations, but anything that's like officially designated, I think, just to provide some strict guidelines as far as what is and what is not a playground. I think that definition needs to be, in looking at it now, just formalized a little bit.
Okay, so maybe something like maintained or owned by a political subdivision by the state, or a political subdivision of the state, like we use in school.
Yeah, I would be good with that, or as you stated, like an association, some sort of recognized official, like you said, an HOA too. I would want to include that. I wouldn't want to limit that, but it needs to be something that's maintained and, facilitated and operated and has funds towards it officially. And I know you don't need to put all that in there, but something that would just recognize that. Beyond that, I appreciate the updates and your affirmative presentation outlining the proposed changes to 3010. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Deputy Chief Allen, do you have any comments you'd like to make about this regulation? I know you and your team are regularly involved with this.
Yes, so Deputy Chief Nathan Allen for the record. Essentially, this was sort of driven by a little bit by the industry, but also meeting with the team. So we wanted to identify certain.
I'm sorry, is your microphone on?
Can you
I
hear
just
me now?
don't see you coming up here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we wanted to identify some of these definitions to nail them down, give the industry a little bit more clarity as far as what we were looking for, but also some feedback from the industry in terms of affirmatively presenting and providing a sufficient showing. That's their responsibility. And so having these options to them available and kind of designating that is what was driving this. And as it's already been indicated, deferring to the local jurisdictions when that's available is definitely preferred, but it also gives us the option for jurisdictions that maybe they rely on us first, or maybe there's other circumstances that we need to consider. But so that was what was driving this.
Very good. And so it's your view that this will streamline it and make it an easier showing where applicable?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the general public who'd like to step forward if they care to make a statement about regulation 3.010 and the proposed changes. Let the record show that there were no members of the public who wanted to step forward and speak to this. Very good then. Judge Assad, any comments?
Yeah, I just think that under section 4B, the word may is in there 3 times. The board may recommend, the commission may determine, the commission may consider. It gives both the board and the commission inherent discretion to interpret the language and the facts that are going to be surrounding, whether it's a school, a playground, or the immediate vicinity within 1,500 feet. So I'm comfortable with that language.
Thank you very much. Anything further, Member Sindall?
No, nothing further. I guess just some clarity then. It sounded like you still had some outstanding concerns, and I'm not sure if Dag McKellar still had to propose language or just we're giving him direction at this point to move forward some potential revisions to this definition.
Yes, it looks like, I guess there are 2 items that need further consideration. As you say, Member Sindall, the playground definition, and then I do want to understand what we mean by child care facility. Is child care facility a term of art that we're required to look at under the statute, or what made you put that in there, Senior Deputy?
I was just going with kind of the intent of the regulation. It seemed to be the board and commission need to give extra consideration to locations which are in areas where minors are regularly present. And so that is why I threw that in there. There's nothing that requires it to be in there. It was just kind of a global intent-based term I put in there.
Very good, thank you. Yes, I'd like to just maybe look into a little bit about the different types of licensing for childcare facilities and whether there is differentiation between, say, a safe key type program and then a private entity program that just could be meant to be for a couple of hours, like Kids Quest. I just would want to understand that. But beyond that, I'm in support of the regulation. And then it sounds like Member Sendall had a requested review and possible change for the playground definition as well.
Correct. Yes, thank you.
Very good. So if there's no further discussion, I believe we would be ready to take a motion on this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Dreitzer. I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 3.010 as presented in the draft dated November 10th, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption.
Very good. Madam Secretary.
Real quick for clarity, did the board want some of the child care facilities included in the definition and excluding others, or did it want just schools and preschools?
I think a little bit more background is in order to understand what is meant by childcare facility. I appreciate and understand why that was included, but I do want to understand the different approvals and licensing that childcare facilities hold, if there is any distinction there. I'd like to understand that before we address that particular piece of the reg, but I believe that, you know, it's close, and I just would want to understand if there's a differentiation to be made.
Okay, then might I suggest one of two things, that this either be brought back before the board for a discussion of those different types of things to send forward to the commission, or that the motion delegate the final language to you as the chair regarding childcare facilities that goes before the commission.
Would that also include the consideration of potential revision to the playground definition?
I think the record is pretty clear as to what should be included in that definition. So I think I have enough to put that in place. But the childcare facilities, just based on the different types, and that you want me to provide more information and then make a decision as to which childcare facilities, if any, are included in the definition of school. That's the piece that might need a little more of a decision.
So let's do that then. If the board members are willing to defer to the chair, then we can take a motion in that regard as to that specific issue of reviewing the types of childcare facilities and ascertaining for adoption of the final language to be presented to the commission, which types of childcare facilities are to be included.
I'm fine with that, Judge. I don't know if Judge Assad, you're okay with that?
So am I.
Okay.
Very good.
Well, then
thank
I
you.
move to amend my motion per the direction of Dag McKella, providing final authority to the chair on the final regulatory language that is amended regarding the use of the term child care facilities as it relates to the defined term school within the regulation.
Very good. Thank you for that, Madam Secretary.
Member Assad,
Aye.
Member Sendall,
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Then, Madam Secretary, please read in our next agenda item.
Your next item is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5 regarding, without limitation, clarification of the applicability of Regulations 5.300 through 5.380 consistent with NRS 463.0144, corrections to cross-reference formats in Regulations 5.300 subsections 2 through 3, 5.320 subsections 1 through 5, 5.335 subsection 1, 5.345 subsection 1, and 5.370 subsection 5. And sorry about that, I left off a number. And another subsection as noted on the agenda, repeal of regulation 5.300 subsection 4 with an exception for limited frequency venues, amendment to regulation 5.035 subsection 2 to include access to pool cabanas and other venue seating within consideration, amendment to regulation 5.320 subsection 2 to include cashiers as club venue employees, adoption of new regulation 5.350 requiring notice to the board of club venue openings, ownership changes and closures, and authorizing the chair to waive or modify timelines. Amendment to regulation 5.360 subsection 3 to reduce from 60 to 30 days the deadlines for submission and of club venue annual policies and other matters properly related thereto.
Very good, then. I believe we have with us this afternoon for a presentation, Senior Deputy Attorney General Ed McGaugh. Good afternoon, as well as Chief Torgerson of the Enforcement Division. So with that, maybe we should start with the presentation from Senior Deputy Attorney General McGaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, member, and Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm Ed McGaugh with the Nevada Attorney General's Office, here today to present the proposed amendments to NGC regulations that address club venues. You should have before you a draft labeled Revised Workshop Draft dated December 4th, 2025. If the commission approves the board's recommended draft, it would become effective upon adoption by the commission. If it pleases the chair, I will briefly go through each change. If the board members have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask.
Thank you.
As a preliminary matter, the board is proposing multiple non-substantive changes intended to standardize the terminology and cross-reference formats used in the regulations in order to better match the style used by the Legislative Counsel Bureau in the Nevada Administration Code and the NRS. Those changes are throughout the draft. Moving on to the substantive changes, the first proposed change is to NGC Regulation 5.300, which is found on pages 1 and 2 of the draft. These changes are as follows. Amend subsection 1 to better mirror the language found in the statute and to list certain specific offerings that qualify a venue as a club venue. Second, amend the waiver provision found in subsection 3 to match the standard language used throughout the regulations for waivers for similar provisions. This includes adding a provision that states the chair has the power to condition or limit any waiver or modification, and that the chair has the power to repeal any waiver or modification granted. Third, the changes add a provision that requires licensees to notify the board in writing at least 15 days prior to holding an event to which subsection 4 applies. The next proposed change is to NGC Regulation 5.305, which is found on page 3 of the draft. This change amends the definition of consideration to include a waived or complimentary admission to a pool or seating access in a club venue. The next proposed change is to subsection 2 of NGC Regulation 5.320, which is found on pages 3 and 4 of the draft. This change adds cashiers to the list of employees who are considered club venue employees under the regulations. The next proposed changes are to subsection 5 of NGC Regulation 5.320, which is found on page 4 of the draft. This change clarifies who is responsible for compliance with the registered gaming employee requirements related to the employee club venues. The next proposed change is the addition of NGC Regulation 5.350 found on page 6 of the draft. This proposed section imposes notification requirements on licensees relating to the opening or closing of a club venue, as well as any changes to the ownership or operation thereof. The next proposed changes are to subsection 3 of NGC Regulation 5.360, which is found on page 8 of the draft. This changes the date by which a licensee must submit material changes to the club venue policies and procedures from 60 days to 30. It also changes the time period in which the chair must disapprove or unapprove or not approve. Sorry about the word change there. The changes from 60 days down to 30 days. The next proposed change is to subsection 5 of NGC Regulation 5.370, which is found on page 9 of the draft. This change simply removes the effective date of the enactment of a provision that is no longer necessary or relevant. With that, or the adoption date information is no longer necessary or relevant. With that, I conclude my affirmative presentation and be happy to answer any questions the board members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what I'd like to do before we ask questions is ask Chief Torgerson to do two things, if you could.
Okay.
First of all, if you could, for the record, step us through in broad terms, Regulation 5 as it pertains to club venues and what the regulation covers generally. I think that's important background both for the board and for the commission. And then secondly, give your points of view on these amendments on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, happy to do so. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
As stated by Senior Dag McGaw, Reg 5 definitely goes through our expectations for club venues throughout the state. As he mentioned, we're definitely looking to fine-tune some things and tighten up some things as far as requirements, add transparency to industry stakeholders. And it was our goal to ensure that our regulation is mirroring the state statute, which is NRS 463.0144, club venue defined. So we've done that in section 5.300. I think that there may be some further discussion as far as pool venues, and we're happy to take those questions and discuss that on the record later today. Also, we were it was important to us is to make sure that we had proper notification from our licensees and club operators. I think it's really important to know that a new venue is opening up, and with our manpower restraints, it's very difficult to know without being on social media and really tracking all of our licensees to that level. So the notification piece is significant within this proposed change, and I think that that will serve us all well. We are definitely maintaining some flexibility with club venues or venues that maybe want to act as a club venue 4 times a year. We're maintaining that. I think that's a good standard, but we are asking to be notified as well, and that previously did not occur. So really, it's more to aid in transparency for the stakeholders, our expectations and guidance. We are focusing also on waiver provisions, not that we want to process hundreds of waivers, but if there is a new venue or business model that may require further screening, we're happy to take a look at that. You would just submit in writing. We would evaluate that based on the regulation and statute and also the spirit of your business model to determine if certain requirements could be waived. And with that being said, Chair, I think that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you for that. I would look forward to hearing if there are any members of the public who care to speak. But before that, do either of my colleagues have any questions for either Chief Torgerson or Senior Deputy Attorney General McGaw? Let's start with Judge Assad.
Thank you, Chairman Drutz. I don't have any questions. It's just pretty much clean up language to comport with the statute. So I don't have any particular questions.
Very good. Thank you for that. Member Sendall.
Yes, Senior Dag McGaw, I just had one minor question on page 8 regarding where the days are being shortened from 60 to 30 days. And that's under 5.360 subsection 3. I chatted with you about this yesterday as well. It was an existing use of the term working days after the second time, but not the first time. And I just, for consistency's sake, wasn't sure why the differentiation was put there and if it's still necessary to keep it there, that on that second part, right, if the chair does not disapprove the submitted policies and procedures within 30 working days of receipt of them, whereas above, right, it says shall submit material changes to such policies and procedures within just 30 days, which I'm assuming that automatically just presumes calendar days without the distinction. And if you're able to get any further thought on why that term is used there and whether that's really appropriate or necessary there.
Thank you, Member Sindall. I am not aware of why when they originally drafted the reg, they made that distinction on the second set of 30 days where the chairman has 30 working days versus 30 calendar days, and not aware of any reason, either logically or substantively, why that was put in there. And it's certainly within the board's prerogative to make them mirror each other and to remove working days there if they so desire. I don't know if there's a particular reason the chair would need the additional time to review these plans. Maybe Chief Torgerson can speak to that. I'm not familiar if the board has received or the standard procedures that are followed in these cases.
So for us, our concentration or focus was just to reduce the time frame. I think it's important that we, stay engaged with our club operators. I think security is extremely important. A lot going on in the city. And so to see the best practices and be notified of any changes, that's what's relative to us. As far as technical language, I don't really have a preference.
May I ask the chief a question real fast? Do you believe that the chair needs 30 working days versus 30 calendar days to do that review?
Technically, it's staff that's reviewing these and giving recommendations or concerns to the chairman. So with that being said, I don't think we have a preference.
Thank you.
Okay, so it sounded like it's not necessary there, and we can likely strike the use of the word working days without really doing anything harmful or against the kind of directive or kind of purpose of this provision. Is that correct?
That is correct, Member Salva, and that benefits the industry because they'll get an answer quicker than 30 working days versus 30 business or calendar days.
Okay, that was the one thing, Chairman, I wanted to clarify from staff. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I had a quick question. 5350, I understand certainly why it's necessary. Practically speaking, Chief Torgerson, what was done before up until now in terms of notification? Was it an informal notification?
I believe when the regulation was formulated and first codified that there was more of a self-report upon licensees, but there was no requirement within the regulation, and it just was a little loose for us, and so much is happening so quickly out there for them. I don't think they think about it sometimes. On occasion, we'll get a notification with more sophisticated licensee, but typically we stumble across these and then we're trying to go out and actually look at the surveillance systems and make sure all the approvals and gaming employees are registered, and it's just kind of a mess. So with this notification, I think it'll make it go smoother for everyone along the way, to include, when they're installing cameras with construction on the footprint.
Very good. And I think it's good change and consistent with many other areas where we require licensees to notify us so we can respond accordingly. Thank you for that. Is there any member of the public present here today who would care to speak on these changes proposed for regulation 5.300 through 5380? Seeing none, I believe then a motion might be in order. Could my colleagues care to make a motion?
Yes, Chairman Dreitzer, I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5 as presented in the draft dated December 4th, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption.
Well, very good. Thank you for that. Madam Secretary.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Sindall?
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer.
Aye. The motion passes. Thank you. We will turn then to our next item. Madam Secretary, please read it into the record.
Your next item is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission of amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5.160 and the surveillance standards regarding without limitation updates to licensee submission requirements in sections 9 and 10, revisions to surveillance standards section 1.010, update of license categories in section 1.020 from revenue-based to activity-based, amendments to section 2.010 on surveillance equipment, staffing classifications, training and malfunction notifications, modernization of minimum requirements in standards 1 through 8, slots, tables, card games, Keno, bingo, race, sports, parimutuel, cage, vault, count rooms and security offices, updates to standard 9, record keeping, updates to standard 10, gaming salons, updates to standard 11, club venues, updates to standard 12, recording technology, and standard 13, system requirements, adoption of new standard 14 for restricted licensees, and other matters properly related thereto.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. I believe to start off, we have a presentation from Deputy Attorney General Nona Lawrence on this matter.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, members of the board, Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm Nona Lawrence with the Nevada Attorney General's Office here today to present proposed amendments to NGC Regulation 5.160, which addresses casino surveillance systems for the installation, maintenance, and operation of surveillance systems at all licensed non-restricted establishments, as well as amendments to the actual casino surveillance standards. For clarity, Chair, this proposal is bifurcated in that the board may vote, if it so chooses, on the amendments to the language of the regulation. The amendments to the actual surveillance standards can be approved administratively and then posted to the board's website for a period of 30 days before going into effect pursuant to NGC Regulation 5.160, subsection 3. Should there be any changes to the version that is initially posted, amendments can be made and then posted for another 30-day period. If it pleases the chair, I will briefly go through each substantive change of the regulation, followed by the changes to the surveillance standards, unless you prefer that the regulation changes are dealt with first so that the board may consider a recommendation, followed by the amendments to the actual security standards, whichever you choose.
Why don't you please go ahead and start with the amendments to the regulation?
Thank you.
And then from there, we'll ask for members of the public to speak if they choose to do so on the regulation. And then from there, we'll have a separate discussion about the security standards.
Very well. The first proposed amendment to NGC Regulation 5.160 subsection 9, which eliminates the requirement that the licensees submit the annual surveillance system plan to the board and eliminates the required chair approval. Instead, the plan must be maintained on the property of the licensee. We wish to also amend the published draft to delete the additional language in support of this change. The last line of 5.160 subsection 9 will be deleted as there will no longer be a submittal to the board. The second proposed amendment to Regulation 5.160 subsection 10, which is eliminated in its entirety. Previously, the chair would need to notify the licensee in writing if the surveillance system plan did not comply with subsection 9. Since the requirement to submit the plan was eliminated in subsection 9, so is the required notification attached to that submission.
Very good. And that's, just to be clear, that's the entirety of the regulation change.
That's correct.
Thank you. So is there any member of the public wishing to speak to those changes? I see Ms. Okerberg making her way up. Please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Chair Dreitzer, Member Assad, Member Sendal, Madam Secretary. For the record, Erica Okerberg. I am here today appearing on behalf of Century Gaming as well as Golden Root Operations. I am speaking as to Regulation 5.160, the definition of licensee in 1 subsection D. I understand the board intends to adopt a surveillance standard that applies to restricted licensees. The definition in the regulation of licensee currently only contemplates a non-restricted operation. So I believe that including a restricted operation here would allow for the rest of the regulation to apply to restricted licensees, including the ability to seek a waiver from the chair and the other components.
Very good. So that's all, your sole commentary on 5.160?
It is, yes.
Very good. Okay. So with that, I would ask then Chief Torgerson to speak as to these changes.
Yes, we spent some time working with stakeholders and looking at our operational aspects of this. This submittal, licensees have done a great job submitting every year. I think it's time intensive for them and also for board staff. And really, these submittals, it's just a picture or a moment in time, because every time a pit is reconfigured or a table's moved, technically there is a change to their surveillance plan and maps and diagrams. With that being said, we're not finding a lot of value in the evaluation annually, and we would prefer that the licensees, keep these up to speed or up to date. And that way, when we come on site or do inspections or have questions, we can solicit this information. I think it's a good tool for the licensees, also for us, and potentially with critical incidents, also for law enforcement with these maps and camera availabilities. With that being said, that's really the basis of the change. I would also note that when a new applicant is licensed, they still have the requirement pursuant to 5.160 to submit for the first time for evaluation of that plan to make sure they're on track, they understand the standard and expectations of the board.
So to be clear, Ms. Okerberg, you're in support of these?
Yes, we are in support of the change subject to the comment that I just raised.
Very good. Okay. With
Thank
that, we'll turn then to the surveillance standards. Ms.
Thank you.
Lawrence, please
Thank you,
proceed.
Chair. The changes to the surveillance standards are as follows. Section 1.010, definitions were modified to align modern technical terminology to add a new definition for electronic table games. Section 1.020, licensee categories. New licensee categories were developed on game supervision in lieu of the previous revenue-based criteria. Section 2.010, surveillance equipment. Modifications were made to update regulatory requirements to the new licensee categories. For changes to the actual standards, Standard 1 is amended to change the base payout amount for dedicated slot machine cameras from $250,000 to $500,000. Standard 2 adds electronic table games operating in conjunction with a dealer to the list of table game surveillance requirements and clarifies that the table games with progressive jackpots must provide coverage of the entire table surface. Standard 3 redefines coverage for card games and adds new regulatory requirements. Standard 4 clarifies that Keno and Bingo surveillance applies to all categories of licensees. Standard 5 includes new requirements for cash drawer transactions and racebook, sports pool, and parimutuel wagering kiosks. Standard 6 updates the applicability to all licensees to have the capability to monitor and record all areas of the cage, as well as new requirements for licensees offering TITO machines. TITO machines refers to ticket in, ticket out. Standard 7 updates the applicability to include all licensees and clarifies the areas in the count room to be surveilled. Standard 8 updates the applicability to all licensees and clarifies that the entire security room must be included in the video surveillance. Standard 9 is amended to require licensees to retain the recordings from 7 to 15 days. It also clarifies that written surveillance plans apply to non-restricted licensees only. Standard 10 clarifies that the slot machines in gaming salons, which have a base payout of more than $500,000, must have dedicated camera coverage and adds card games to subsection 2. Standard 11 updates areas in club venues that must have surveillance coverage. It also clarifies required protocols for surveillance system malfunctions and reporting requirements. The language also increases the minimum required days of retention from 7 to 15. Standard 12 updates language to comport with modern technology, increases retention times from 7 to 15 days, and adds requirements for remote access when licensees consolidate surveillance coverage for multiple properties. It also clarifies which portions of the standard are applicable to non-restricted licensees only. Standard 13 updates language and also clarifies that this standard applies only to non-restricted licensees. Standard 14 is new and was created to delineate that restricted licensees will now be required to install surveillance systems and cameras in gaming areas. And those are all the amendments to the standards.
Thank you very much. Before we open it up to board questions and then ultimately to members of the public to offer their testimony, Chief Torgerson, would you walk us through these from your perspective? Why these are necessary in each instance? If you could go through each of the standards, I would appreciate that. And then we will, I'm sure, have questions for you and for Ms. Lawrence.
Of course. Thank you, Chair. Looking through these standards at the beginning, we did have a change in the definitions. We're doing that because we're finding that the language currently is antiquated and old. And as technology has evolved, it's important for us to reflect that in our regulatory product. So we did consult with many surveillance directors, and they were very helpful in bringing us up to speed with the technical language. You will find the changes of definitions in 1.010 subsection 3, in subsection 5. And we here at the board have added a new definition. It's subsection 7 for electronic table game, which is referenced throughout the surveillance standard document. Also, our licensee categories have changed. They used to be revenue-based. Looking at that too is antiquated. I don't really think that we're using that much, for an operational purpose at this point in time. Looking at the surveillance directors, they don't know what the revenue is for the property. Board staff doesn't know without looking into our database, and it makes it very unfriendly. So we transitioning from the revenue basis to looking at categories which reflect more about game supervision. And I think that we have captured a sweet spot, but we're open to discussion on the record today. We've received a lot of stakeholder input with that as well. As far as surveillance equipment, the changes here within this section really are to define, who it applies to as far as stakeholders, now that we have proposed restricted licensees have surveillance systems. And we are cleaning things up relative to the categories that we've made changes to. And primarily those categories, the big change is that if you have 10 or more table games, to include poker or electronic table games, that you would need to have a 24/7 surveillance room on the footprint. If you have less than 10, then you would need to have an employee on premise. And if you are non-restricted slots only operation, you would have to be able to respond to board requests to the property within 60 minutes. And that's really all that those categories delineate. Moving on to standard 1. It was a recommendation from our stakeholders that we up the level for the base amount payout for dedicated coverage on slot machines. Because the machines are so technical and have so many other tools for us to arbitrate disputes, we agreed to move that from $250,000 to $500,000. That being said, standard 2, table games, just really fine tuning, adding that electronic table game consideration in there. And we are specifying those to be in conjunction with a dealer. So if it's acting solely as a slot machine, That does not apply here. We are cleaning up also that we want to be able to see card values and suits on the table to aid in disputes and complaints from patrons, and therefore the entire table surface would be covered. For standard 3, card games, we are traditionally mirroring the standards that we have for table games for card games. We're finding that there's room there to fine tune and have these tools as well for this type of card operation. For Keno and Bingo is a simple change for licensees. And as Deputy Lawrence already acknowledged, all categories of licensees are included. When we say that, if you have this type of operation on your footprint, they're included. So if you are a Cat B, for instance, where you have 10 or less, but you have Keno, you still would have to conform to standard 4. Standard 5 is race and sports books. Not much change there. We're fine tuning that, focusing on cash drawer transactions. I think it's important with theft with our licensees that we're capturing that and have that tool to be able to prosecute crime. And also the ability to monitor and record just general activities around kiosks. A lot of scams and problems with kiosks where people are getting distracted and then someone's stealing money or their ticket. So that was the intent there. Standard 6, casino cage and vault, really trying to fine tune what we're requiring in practice when we do our inspections. And that's that all areas within the cage should have coverage. Sometimes it's difficult if we have dual use where there's an office that, is part of the cage. But I think that if it's meeting that cage footprint, it's so important to have that coverage. For count rooms, much of the same, not many changes there, just making sure that we're clear on what needs coverage. Security offices, really not much change there, but the same philosophy plays as if we have someone detained, that area needs to have full coverage. And if within that footprint, unfortunately, there is an office, it's very difficult for us to segregate and ensure that video and audio is being turned on and off properly. So we're asking for the whole footprint to be covered. In standard 9, one of our probably most controversial is we're looking to up the requirement for gaming surveillance footage for the retention from 7 to 15 days. Looking at best practices throughout the United States and other jurisdictions, there are many jurisdictions that have 30, 60, 90. I understand that they're not Vegas. They're not maybe as big of a property, or maybe they don't have as many properties, but I believe that 15 days might be a good meeting point rather than a 30-day increase. With that being said, standard 10, gaming salons, we're just mirroring what the requirement is for slot operations at a $500,000 payout. So we've added that in now that slot machines are included within salon footprints. Standard 11, club venue. We have basically just added a couple more pieces that need to be required for coverage, such as security podiums and also cashiering for entry into the venue. I think it's really important that we're capturing the screening processes and that people that are being paid there aren't letting people in for free and not vetting people properly. So we're looking to cover those areas. Also within clubs, the surveillance equipment, we're just making sure that it's clear where when there is a dedicated camera malfunction, the process for the licensee and what they have to do to engage with the board as far as notification. And we've cleaned that up a little bit too to ensure that that is clear and it's consistent, whether it's a surveillance system outage or a camera outage. And for digital recording standards, just really cleaning that up and adding that modern verbiage in. Within standard 12 recording standards, once again, you're going to be seeing just a lot of updates to the terminology and also for notification purposes to the board, specifically requests from stakeholders for consolidation purposes. I think it's important that we're notified, and if they wish to have one central location for surveillance viewing, that we're actually providing guidance on that rather than requiring a formal approval and holding them up to do that. Remote access is really important as well. Traditionally, it's a closed system and we haven't allowed any changes to that. We are putting in language to be considered that would allow for licensees to make a business decision to potentially, in view of best practices, to actually use cloud-based storage. And I think that might help mitigate our retention requirements being moved from 7 to 15. And in standard 13, just surveillance systems, pretty basic there. And of course, standard 14, looking forward to some discussion on that. It's a very new concept, but in looking at what we do with license conditions currently with new licensees, a lot of times we're asking for a system anyway. And I would like to take a chance to discuss that. Hopefully with the chair's approval, we'll get some good dialogue on the record and talk about the pros and cons to adding restricted licensees to this product.
Thank you very much. With respect to 1.020 in the categories, can you tell me a little bit more about how you established those categories? I definitely understand the shift to be based upon the number of tables, but what's more of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, it was very challenging because, of course, we're capturing numerous stakeholders that are very diverse throughout the state. And so what we did is we solicited input from stakeholders to define what kind of ratios for supervision is occurring on their footprints or in their pits. And we came to a point where we really found that 10 was that, depending on table limits, was that sweet spot where, you know, maybe a supervisor and a dealer could handle proper supervision of 10 games. And so with that being said, we posed that in here for discussion. We also looked at the revenue for different categories previously to see if that revenue and what they were doing on site as far as surveillance systems and manned rooms would correlate with our proposed changes here.
Thank you for that. And then standard 1 had been 250,000. How old was that standard at 250? Do we know how long it's been at 250?
I don't know if there was a change to that. I do see an amendment on 1023. So outside of that, I'm not sure without going further into our database and records.
Okay. Thank you. I will defer the balance of my questions until I hear from comments from the public. Member Sendall, any questions of Chief Torgerson or Deputy Lawrence?
Yeah, I appreciate your guys' affirmative presentation, and I just wanted to first start with the 5.160. I think Dag Lawrence clarified that under subsection 9 at the end that the last sentence will be stricken, but that's not the current version we have. So I just need to note that as an amendment in the motion.
That's correct.
Okay. And then my second question is under 5.160, under subsection 1, has a definition of chair, means the chair of the Nevada Gaming Control Board or the chair's designee. Does that definition apply to the surveillance standards as well?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then my one comment then would be is in the surveillance standards themselves, it's a little inconsistent with how the chair is referenced. I noticed board chair. I noticed the use of the term chair's designee. And then I think even said one other way, board chair again. I guess I would just ask that we maybe just clean that up to mirror chair.
We can do that.
Clear wherever that's referenced, since the definition of it in 5.160 covers it. And I think the only other question I had was the 10 or more, and then the less than 10 under 1.020 in the license categories. Could you clarify, Chief Torgerson, the second sentence says this includes any electronic table game that requires a dealer to operate the game. Does that mean then in counting the number of tables, it would be whether for an electronic table game, you would only count the table if there was an actual live dealer there?
Yes, that's correct. We would only include that in this connotation relative to those operating with a dealer, much like a table game.
Got it. Okay, those were my comments for now. Thank you, Chair.
Member Sendall, I just have one other question, and maybe for you and Dag Lawrence, but when we are unifying or looking at the chair throughout here or chair's designee, I just want to make sure that there is a distinction for us operationally. If there's a chair's designee, there might be some sort of approval within here where I'm signing for him as his designee for the approval versus other times it would be directly for his signature. I just wanted to put that on the record.
I don't think that interferes or messes with the definition as stated, but yeah, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judge Assad, any questions about 5.160 and or the standards?
Yeah, no, I think most of the issues have been discussed. I just want to commend and thank Dag Lawrence and Chief Torgerson for their hard work on this. This stuff is not easy. It takes a lot of time and effort. And if you look at it from the perspective of the end result, the hearing officers that handle these patron disputes, and then the board that has to decide patron disputes, ultimately, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So the more surveillance we have, the more video we can get, the easier it becomes for the hearing officer and the board to make a correct determination. So I commend you for delving into this issue. Thank you.
Very good. With that, at this time, we will accept testimony from members of the public who would care to comment as to the standard changes proposed here today. As mentioned earlier, these will not be voted on, but we definitely would welcome members of the public who care to make commentary about the proposed changes to the surveillance standards. So if there's anybody here, please come forward and state your name for the record. Thank you.
Good morning again, Chair Dreitzer, Member Assad, Member Sendall, and Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm Erica Okerberg. I'm appearing today again on behalf of Century Gaming and Golden Root Operations. The companies thank the board and the Attorney General's office for all of their time and consideration that went into working on the regulation changes as well as the surveillance standards. Between the two companies, they manage over 1,000 locations in Nevada, and so they've paid quite a bit of attention to the proposed changes and the impact that it might have on themselves and their partners. In considering the proposed amendments to the surveillance standards, they considered some of the practical realities and the issues that might arise for the locations with a strict interpretation of the proposal for restricted locations to have surveillance standards. Those primarily relate to levels of technical sophistication, infrastructure, cost, and management. So based on these items, the companies have proposed some changes to the proposed surveillance standards that would address a few key components. One is to remove the requirement for monitoring systems, not that the surveillance system is incapable of monitoring, but to have the actual monitors on site and available. To grandfather in existing locations unless there is a qualifying event, which could include the loss of grandfathering status or a change of control. Allowing a slot route operator to designate one of its employees to serve in the role of being the coordinator with the board for surveillance systems, rather than each of the locations to have their own individual employee designated in that capacity. And to clarify the components of 2.010 and Standard 12 that would apply to restricted licensees. We proposed some language to address these points. If the board would like, I'm happy to discuss those and walk through those.
Yes, I think that'd be appropriate, and then we'll have Chief Torgerson give her thoughts on each of these.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So what we did with the proposed changes to Standard 14, well, let me go back. So one thing that we did change in proposed 2.010 was the numbering. And what we did here is we actually split the two sentences that are in current subsection 14 into two components. So each video camera required by these standards must possess the capability of having its picture displayed on a video monitor and recorded, would remain in 14, and then we would break that second sentence off and put it into a new number 15. And the reason for that is because, as I will discuss in a few moments, we have proposed specifying which sections will apply to restricted licensees, and we will propose that part of this will apply to restricted licensees and the other part will not. Specifically, we would propose that 14 will apply to restricted licensees and 15 will not. The reason for that is because new 15 rather, requires numbers of monitors. And that goes back to the point we raised about seeking to not have monitors on site. With that change to 2.010, I'd like to turn back to standard 14 and walk through the proposed additions there. In new subsection 1, we proposed that all new restricted locations who receive their license after the effective date of this standard is required to comply with it. Then we have 2 additional categories. The first is a restricted location that received its license before the effective date of this standard, and that it is not grandfathered. Those locations would be required to come into compliance with the standard within 30 days following any of these 3 events, either a change of ownership or control, the location closing for a period of 6 months or more, or the location materially amending or remodeling its operations. And then the second instance would apply to the grandfathered locations, which are grandfathered based on the size restrictions. So for those locations, the proposal is that the restricted locations that are grandfathered would be exempt from this standard unless or until they either increase their square footage to comply with the current standard or they cease operations. In either of those instances, they would be required to come into compliance with this standard within 30 days. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, subsection 4 would propose and make clear that a slot route operator could designate an employee to satisfy the requirement of having a specific person identified who can coordinate with the board on requests as it relates to surveillance. Subsection 5 will require and specify the different subsections of 2.010 and standard 12 that would apply to restricted licensees. In this particular instance, we believe for these subsections that we have captured the ones that specifically do not mention non-restricted licensees, and therefore we assume are the intent of which items the Enforcement Division would like to apply to restricted licensees, with the exception of the point that I made at the top of my comments, which is that breakup that we created of those 2 sentences in subsection 14, creating a new subsection 15. With that, I'm happy to talk through any questions that you might have on that. Otherwise, of course, understand if you would like to hear from Chief Torgerson next.
I think it would make sense for Chief Torgerson to respond with some thoughts on each of these items. If you could go in the same order that Ms. Okerberg went in, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate the feedback and input. It was very difficult to assess even going down this road because we don't engage a lot with our restricted stakeholders here in enforcement relative to camera coverage other than license condition standards. So with that being said, under 2.010 surveillance equipment, I understand the break that you've done here and your recommendation for edits, and we have no concern with that. That sounds fine. I know that at a lot of the locations that currently have surveillance systems, there is a monitor that they have chose to put in the back so they can actually go and review footage so that agents could come on site and review footage rather than, obtaining the footage and going to a different location. If you're thinking or your client is thinking about consolidation, I know that that is a concept that has been put out there and has come to my attention where they are going to have like a super system, a location consolidating many of their locations, and that would be the location that we could go to view. That is an alternative. Moving down to the restricted edits that you've chosen to make, I think number 1 is, of course, fine. That's wonderful, and I appreciate the support in moving forward. I think that that's really important to start having camera coverage and to start having systems for a variety of reasons, not just gaming supervision, but also for security for stores and to aid law enforcement in case of burglaries and that type of thing. These restricted locations a lot of times are having problems with crime. And so that's just another bonus to having a foundation of a system on premise. For number 2, we're talking about within 30 days. From my perspective, what I'd really like to see is that those locations that have been conditioned with either a mirror or camera, if it's an either or, I'd love to see them join into compliance within this proposed reg. I think that would meet the spirit of the condition, and whether that would be a grace period of so much time and to come into compliance, I would defer to the board on that. For 3, those that are grandfathered, I think what you're suggesting is reasonable. Once again, I would defer to the board on that. I'm hoping to capture a majority of these stakeholders because I do believe that there is a need. But I understand that we might have to tier some of these into groups to really get there in its entirety. And for number 4, restricted locations, I don't have really any major concerns there. And I definitely agree with your assessment of what applies throughout the surveillance standards in number 5. I would like to also gain some input from Supervisor Nickel. He speaks to our licensees every day. He takes all their inquiries and processes many of the things that come into enforcement. So please, Supervisor Nickel, if you have anything to add.
Robert Nickel for the record. I agree with that. And what we have currently is kind of a patchwork, just because our only mechanism to require camera coverage is through a license condition. So we found that some locations have conditions and many do not. So that was kind of the thought here, is to have a little more consistency. My only concern with any type of grandfathering was it also kind of creates a patchwork of some that would be grandfathered and some that wouldn't. So it's maybe not ideal, but I understand the need. Other than that, I think this would give us more tools, more oversight of these restricted locations.
And Chair, if you will indulge us, Supervisor Sullivan, from a field services perspective or our agents moving into the field, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, again, Ryan Sullivan for the record. So kind of what Supervisor Nichols said, this definitely will aid in our disputes in our law enforcement investigations. Right now, it's difficult because they're not consistent at all. And when we go out there to investigate, so it'd be nice to have something standard for us to fall back on. And we've seen, I think, an increase in some of the law enforcement investigations over the years with the restricted locations. So that would be huge as far as like the thefts and the claimings and the rise of like the cash cam burglaries, things of that nature. So having some sort of standardized surveillance in place would be a huge help for our section. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Chief Torgerson, just so we could set the record straight, with respect to the enforcement division, specifically which portions of the offered amendments by Ms. Okerberg would the enforcement division stand in objection to? Sounds like there's agreement as to most, but there are some areas that there still might be some objection.
I'm not an expert about grandfathered terms for our licensees, and so I might need some assistance from the board on input there. I think overall, what I'm trying to do is encompass as many licensees as we can. And with that being said, I am open to discussion and your input. That's all I have.
Good. Ms. Okerberg, would you care to respond?
Sure, I will respond to a couple of points. First, the point about the consolidation of a surveillance room and monitors. The companies did think about that, but given the volume of locations, I think they were concerned that that would be very unwieldy. The locations are about 350 in one instance and just under 700 in another. And so that would pose quite a bit of challenges to logistically figure out how to pair and how to create a number of different surveillance rooms to capture all of those cameras. So that would be, I think, the response for the company as to the consolidation. And then as to the point about the conditions that either address surveillance system or a mirror, I would interpret the intent of those conditions to allow the licensee to use either or, depending on what might be appropriate for the scope of location, which would depend, of course, on the size and the layout and things like that as it relates to the store clerk.
Good. Member Sendell, why don't we start with you? Do you have any questions for either Ms. Okerberg or staff?
Yeah, just on your last point, when you said there's 350 or 700 locations, question I wanted to kind of get to is how many locations are actually grandfathered that we think restricted locations that would actually qualify under your proposed, subsection 3 under standard 14?
Yes, so I don't have that exact number. I understand it would take a little bit of time for both licensees to go through and identify those, but there is a number of those that would be considered grandfathered based on the square footage requirement.
So when you say a number, because I think I read they have something like 1,000, one has 1,000 locations, the other has like 700. So of the 1,700, are we talking about under 100 total or a much larger, more significant
I am
number?
calling in Marilyn White to see if she happens to have the number on hand, at least as it relates to Golden Route operations.
Good morning, Chair Dreitzer, Member Sandal, and Judge Assad. It was very difficult for us to try to quantify that amount just because we have so many locations spread throughout the state. We currently have the shy of 700. And it really depended because our sales agents would have to go out to each and every location to find that out. So I think it would take some time. We could always come back with more of a definitive answer to that, but it really is challenging to answer at this point.
I appreciate that. And I think I misspoke too, because it sounds like approximately 1,000 locations total.
Between the two companies, that's correct.
Okay. And I appreciate you breaking these out a little bit and understanding that, you know, we received these, I think I received this yesterday afternoon. So I'm not quite sure if I would be amendable to including these without, you know, having a little bit more discussion and understanding and having you detail out why all these specific provisions are necessary a little bit more. That's kind of where I stand on that. So thanks, Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Member Sandal. And the good thing is, you know, these would be able to be acted on by the board without further discussion. But I mean, we're going to have further discussion, but we can entertain more information. Because the question I would have is, what about an idea of doing grandfathering for a period of time?
Mm-hmm.
And then perhaps say at the end of a 2-year period, it's an arbitrary number, but at the end of a 2-year period, that it would be expected they would come under direct compliance. Thoughts?
Chair Dreitzer, I'd be happy to take that back and think about it. As far as the grandfathered locations that are grandfathered based on size, I think we would have to look at those on a case-by-case basis, because I believe the concern with those locations is that the infrastructure and size of it might not allow for easy implementation of a surveillance system. But we would be happy to go back and look at that and come back to you in more detail on those locations.
Because I think we understand that this is something that's a process.
Yes.
And we don't want to visit, you know, undue harm or undue cost straight away, but migrating towards the future, this is something that's important to us for the reasons I'm sure you understand. So maybe we can consider some sort of phase-in approach, and similar to Member Sandal, maybe let's consider that. You can provide some, you know, input as to that, and I'm inviting other members of the public to provide input about a potential for establishing grandfathering, but over a period of time. I think that might be an ideal solution. And to Chief Torgerson's point, over time, we'll get more and more compliance. We fully recognize it, you know, it's not going to be a day, a week, a month, or maybe even a year, but we will get there and we will have progress in that regard. So I'd be comfortable, or at least would entertain some notion around 2 years. So
Thank
with
you,
that,
understood.
Judge Assad, any questions?
I mean, I'm just gonna echo the comments of Supervisor Nickel and Supervisor Sullivan, and just give it a common sense approach. I think what they said makes a lot of sense. And I'm in favor of just moving forward, but if you want to give a 2-year phase in, that's fine too.
And Chair, may I just add one thing?
Please.
We were very careful in going through the current standards with the technical requirements to make sure that we weren't imposing something that would not be practical, or something that would be so sophisticated that it wouldn't match or align with your operation. And I know today there's a lot of, you know, systems that are just purchased off the shelf. I know that there's a lot of wireless systems, so infrastructure may not always come into play because there's a lot of technology out there that's very user-friendly. And when we think about maybe the downside to that or vulnerabilities, really what are we showing, right? And so I don't know that that is a critical thing. If it were to be compromised, it's a closed system. So I think the risk is very low, and that just might be another possibility to consider and discuss as we look at phasing these locations in.
Thank you. Any further comments that you care to make at this time?
No, thank you, Chair Dreitzer. I would just like to say we thank the board for considering the comments, and we of course would be happy to have a dialogue with the board and the Enforcement Division on some additional information as well as potential refinements along the lines discussed today.
Thank you. Yes, we would definitely appreciate the submission to the board of information. We will withhold the final adoption of these standards until we receive this from you and others. I do want to comment though about this notion where we have taken the amount of retained data from 7 days to 15 days. I think that that's an important step. We understand that it will, in some instances, visit some additional costs on the licensees. So we would potentially be willing to entertain some sort of phase-in for that. If that were concerned, but certainly would entertain further comments on that. But the other piece too is, importantly, as Chief Torgerson mentioned, the ability to now do cloud storage, I think, is a big deal and something that can be I see a number of heads nodding, so we may be on the right track. I think that's a really, in 2025, it's a very safe and effective and cost-effective way to do business in this regard. So we do believe that on balance, while we're asking the number of days retained to extend to 15, we think that's important. That will really assist in our mission, and in some ways it's long overdue. But I think you balance that out with the ability to use a cloud cost, which is becoming more and more cost effective. So we think that that's a good solution without visiting too much additional cost on licensees. I wanted to make that comment for the record. Very good. With that, are there any further comments before we take a motion on the first part of this particular
Thank you.
amendment? Thank you very much.
Actually, Ms. Okerberg, you, in the beginning, when you had your comments, you mentioned something about a definition under 5.160, and you highlighted that the licensee definition only includes or references non-restricted.
That's correct.
Did you, I mean, I understand that, but was there anything, did you have a concern with it that it's only that way, or other than the fact that then we have to clarify restricted licensees whenever restricted licensees are noticed in there?
Yes, so my concern would be that if licensee does not include a restricted operation, then the other provisions in regulation 5.160 as it relates to surveillance system would only apply to a non-restricted. And for example, one of the provisions in this regulation allows for the chair to waive certain of the standards. And I would like it to be clear that to the extent a restricted location, for example, would like to seek a waiver, that they also were able to do so under this regulation.
Got it. Okay. Fair enough. And I guess just simply because that term licensee is defined doesn't limit the chair's ability to, give a waiver to a restricted licensee. But okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood your comment. Thank you.
Very good. Anything further? Before we take the motion, I would want to alert the public and staff on one thing. It would be the intention to publish these standards on or before January 15th, which gives us 30 days plus a little bit of holiday cushion, so to speak. So that's the timeframe that we're working on. So those members of the public who care to provide more input as to the surveillance standards, please do so timely, with the expectation that the standards will be published by January 15th. And I see Mr. Pohl. Good afternoon.
Hi,
morning.
Chandler Pohl for the record, Vice President and Legal Counsel for MGM Resorts.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. So I have a few comments and I'd like to do it in sections. So on the surveillance standards,
yes,
if you're taking comments for that, under 1.010 and under 2.010. So in the definitions of 1.010, PTZ camera has been removed because that was a defined term for pan, tilt, to zoom, and now the rest of the standards use the term camera as opposed to a PTZ camera. So in 2.010.13, where a now deleted PTZ camera, where a camera is used to observe gaming and gaming related activities, we just wanted to make sure that we had firm understanding that there may be cameras in the gaming area that are not primarily used to observe gaming and gaming related activities. And therefore, those cameras that are not primarily used for gaming or gaming related activities would not need to be behind a smoked dome or a one-way mirror. But the cameras that are used primarily for gaming or gaming related activities would be.
I think this says that, but I'll defer to Ms. Lawrence, I believe it says that already, and you want that on the record, fair enough. Ms. Lawrence, thoughts?
I believe that's what subsection 13 already says.
That's how we read it.
Very good, and we'll confirm that's the board's understanding.
Okay.
Yep.
And then in the same section 2.010 sub 15, the new 15, the non-restricted licensee must immediately notify on-duty enforcement division personnel of any surveillance system malfunction that results in non-compliance with these standards. The question we had was the word immediate. Is it implied that there is a period where the licensee can cure the malfunction, or once the licensee is aware of a malfunction, regardless of the ability to cure it, does notice need to be made?
Chief Torgerson, thoughts?
Yeah, I think from a practical standpoint, you're bringing up a good point. I think that if it's something known and identified and is fixable, within a reasonable period of time, meaning an hour or less, you're fine. You don't need to notify us. If it's something that's not resolved and it's going to take further problem solving or purchasing of parts or having a vendor come in, that type of thing, we would definitely need to be notified because your system would be down. Correct?
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Pohl.
Okay.
Anything further?
Some of the other standards later are there going to, should I bring my comments about those standards now? Standards 1, 2, 3 through 12?
As for surveillance, yes, please. Now would be the time for that.
Okay. I didn't want to take if anyone else was going to comment on one of the others.
Yeah, no, again, those aren't to be voted on, but this is the perfect time to receive input as to the standards for surveillance.
Okay. If no one else is going to speak, I can keep going then.
Please proceed.
Okay. In standard 1 and in standard 10, language is introduced, quote, base amount. And that language base amount can be confusing now how machines advertise what is the jackpot amount and what can be multiplied higher than the advertised base amount. And I know that's a conversation we've had previously with enforcement. So we appreciate the raising from the 250 to 500, but we still would like to have clarity on what is, quote, base amount meaning. Is that the advertised amount on the machine, or is that the potential base amount that could be won?
Chief, you or your staff?
Supervisor Sullivan, do you want to speak to that just because of disputes? Do you have a preference on how that should read or the interpretation of that?
No, there really hasn't been any issues. I mean, as far as raising it to the 500, but we're not talking about any kind of interlinked progressives with this. So this is just a 500,000. I mean, I think as long as it's clear to the agent when they're out there doing a dispute investigation, I mean, whatever I don't know if ops has any feedback as far as the best way to do it, but I think as long as it's clear to our agents in the field on what they're looking at and if it should have dedicated coverage or not.
Robert Nickel for the record. I think where this originated, a lot of the way slot machines work nowadays is there isn't just one primary jackpot. In the old days, there might be one jackpot, so it was really easy to see what that amount was, where now sometimes you have different base awards, but you also have bonus games and re-triggers and things like that. So that was some of the confusion. I think that's where that term base amount, it was in reference to the maximum advertised payout of the machine. We had tried to make a better definition to maybe carve out some of those that have jackpot features, but we retreated from that because it was kind of difficult to get a definition. So I think what we're looking at is the top jackpot for the machine.
And if there's a multiplier that then is applied, we would still just use that advertised top jackpot amount, not all the possible multipliers that may or may not occur.
I believe that's what we were trying to capture.
Okay.
I concur with that. Thank you.
And Mr. Pohl, are you suggesting there should be some further modification, or is a discussion about this and a confirmation enough?
This is enough. This discussion's enough to understand.
Excellent. Thank you.
In standard 3, subsection 3. We'd like to ask to have that increase from 25,000 to 50,000.
Could you explain as to why?
Our surveillance team thought that 25 might be too low. And so asked for 50.
And would that apply to both table games and card games then? Because up in, are you at section 2, right? Standard 2 right now? It's there as well.
Three.
Standard 3, section 3.
Okay. And so that is for card games, but the one prior, it talks about the same language in standard 2 for table games. So is your staff wishing both to be raised for consistency or just only card games?
Just the progressive card game with a potential progressive jackpot.
For card games only, not
Right.
table. I personally don't have any concerns with it being raised to 50. Staff, do you have any concerns?
I don't have a lot of concern. I know we had talked about this and I think there are a lot of these progressives out there that fall under 50,000. So we, I think, wanted to capture as many as we could, but I don't know that it would be something very problematic. So I could go either way on that.
Yeah, I agree.
May I ask a question? too?
Please.
So this is like Pai Gow, this Baccarat, poker. What? Just want to get some clarity on what we're talking about.
Card game would be poker.
Just poker. Simply poker and a potential progressive jackpot. Okay, thank you.
What we could do there is with input from enforcement, and they're seeming to suggest that that would be okay. We could go to 50 with the standards that we publish, and then put the comment on the record that we'll take a look at that over the course of the next, say, 6 months. And if there's a need to revise for some reason, if there's an genuine enforcement need, we'll look at it again. But with the information provided from the enforcement division, I'd be comfortable taking it to 50.
And Chair, just a recommendation, we might want to consult with our gaming lab as well on that.
Okay, very good. Well, again, we appreciate that input, Mr. Poland. We'll confer internally and get back to you on it.
Okay, and then the last comment I had was about the consolidation of surveillance rooms. And that is in standard 12. What is now the new subsection 4. If remote access is being conducted because of surveillance room consolidation, the licensee will notify enforcement division's operations before the consolidation. Additionally, all surveillance consolidations must comply with the following. Sub A, the consolidation must maintain or exceed the licensee's current surveillance room staffing levels. So as we read that, one property may have X number of people, a second property may have X number of people. Is the intention once these rooms get consolidated, we do a sum of all the people, or we just have if there is one existing surveillance room, that staffing is sufficient in that surveillance room? Because otherwise, maybe it wouldn't make sense to consolidate.
I think what our concern is that there's a consolidation occurring and a licensee is looking to, cut staff drastically and not have proper game supervision. And so what is being codified here or proposed is actually straight from our approval process for consolidations currently. And we were hoping to move to a level where our licensees could move freely without requiring that approval or requesting that approval. But these were the parameters currently in the letter, and that's what it's conditioned upon. So any discussions on that, we can address that here, but it might be best if we sit down with stakeholders to talk about that. It's a bigger issue.
To find out what the sufficient staffing standard would be.
Yeah, I mean, we've never
Okay.
assigned a staffing ratio, but once again, we want to make sure that there's enough eyes on these games. And by consolidation, there's a risk of, having so many operations and so many games with not enough people to actually have eyes on. That's our concern.
Okay. Thank you. Those were the comments.
Very good. Thank you. And again, let me stress that any conversation and education on both sides that needs to happen, let's do it with an eye towards getting these done and published by January 15th. Thank you, Mr. Paul. Is there anyone further wishing to speak on Regulation 5160 and/or the surveillance standards? Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Eric Golubieski with Caesars Entertainment, Senior Vice President of Security and Surveillance. Just one comment, as we operate the 15 properties here in Nevada, when we move to the 15-day retention of the video, that it's considered that we have enough time to do that installation properly and intelligently, because there's a lot of ways to do it, cloud, servers and that, just giving us a reasonable amount of time to make that effort and do it right.
As I said earlier, I very much appreciate that. That's a comment well taken. Could you give your thoughts about what that time frame would be?
Yeah, I'd have to confer with the team, but I think, you know, somewhere within what you had talked about earlier, a phased approach over a 1 year or a 2 year period, as long as we're moving the properties along that line within that period to get to the end goal of 15 days retention.
So I guess the question would be then for enforcement. I know as to that issue, we were potentially talking a shorter time frame, but Chief Torgerson, what are your thoughts?
So I just want to ask, I mean, we don't understand maybe all the nuances. I'm assuming, you know, we have budgets that we, you know, have current funds available in order to buy parts and systems, and also to maybe restructure our thought process on storage rather than putting storage on a footprint, considering a cloud. The board doesn't endorse that necessarily, or a vendor of any type, but it definitely would be open as a possibility. So I think there would be some policy decisions you'd have to make probably. And in addition, with funds available to secure additional funds, I'm assuming that those are the issues that would require that amount of time. Could that time be reduced, or is there anything we could do to mitigate that to a lesser time period?
It really takes a lot of work to do it right and do it intelligently and set it up correctly. I would say at least within that 1 year period, I think is a reasonable time for us to do our research, our due diligence, in order to get that done correctly.
Okay, thank you.
We appreciate that input, and certainly with an organization of your size, with the scope and the number of locations we're talking about, you know, we've been 7 days for a very long time, and this is a pretty significant change, an important one, but a significant one. So definitely want to make sure that you have the time you need to get it right, as all licensees. So that's a comment from my perspective, well taken. I don't know that I'd want to extend more than a year, but it's well taken, and we'll consider that as we draft these final surveillance standards to be published next month. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else wishing to be heard on Regulation 5.160 or surveillance standards at this time? Seeing none, I believe we are ready for a motion
Yes, Chairman Dreitzer, I'm ready to make that motion.
as to Regulation 5.16 only, please. Yes.
I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 5.160 as presented in the draft dated December 1st, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption.
Thank you very much, Member Sendall. Madam Secretary.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Sendall?
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer?
Aye. The motion passes. Thank you for that. And we appreciate the discussion here today, and we will take all of it in careful consideration as we finalize the revised surveillance standards. So thank you all for your participation. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll resume with our next item thereafter. Thank you. Okay. We're about ready to get back on the record, please. Thank you. Wait 1 minute. Thank you. All right, very good then. Welcome back. We'll continue, Madam Secretary, with our next item. Please read it into the record.
Your next item is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission of amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 12 regarding without limitation, correction of cross-references and removal of an obsolete effective date subsection in Regulation 12.020, non-substantive grammatical revisions to Regulations 12.030 and 12.050, revisions to requirements for redemption of chips and tokens in Regulation 12.060, revisions to requirements for redemption and disposal of discontinued chips and tokens in Regulation 12.070, revisions to requirements for disposition of discontinued promotional and tournament chips and tokens in Regulation 12.090, and other matters properly related thereto.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I believe we have an affirmative presentation from Senior Deputy Attorney General Ed McGaugh to begin this matter. Mr. McGaugh.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm Ed McGaugh with the Nevada Attorney General's Office, here today to present the proposed amendments to NGC Regulation 12, which addresses chips and tokens. You should have before you a draft dated November 12th, 2025. And I believe that's the date. Yeah. And if approved by the commission, these changes would become effective upon adoption. As a preliminary matter, the board is proposing multiple non-substantive changes to the regulations throughout the draft. These are intended to standardize the terminology and cross-references to match the style used by the LCB in the Nevada Administrative Code and in the NRS. Going on to the substantive changes, the first proposed amendment is the repeal of subsection 5 of NGC Regulation 12.020, found on page 3 of the draft. That subsection provided an effective date for amendments enacted back in March of 1995. It was felt enough time has passed to render such provision unnecessary. The next substantive change is to subsection 4 of NGC Regulation 12.060, which is found on page 6 of the draft. This amendment gives the licensee the option to refuse to redeem its chips or tokens if the person presenting them for redemption refuses to provide the licensee with the government-issued photo ID upon request. The next series of substantive changes are to NGC Regulation 12.070, found on page 7 and 8 of the draft. These changes consist of the following. First, remove unnecessary language in subsection 1 and reduce it down to for any reason it is felt that that language is sufficient. Item 2 or second change would be replace the requirement in paragraph C of subsection 2, which requires the publishing in a newspaper, and instead it would be more generic requirement that the notice be sufficient to notify the public and in such manner as the chair approve or require. This is to give more flexibility to the notice options, given that newspapers are not as common as they used to be. The next change would be to add subsection 3 to provide that unless approved in writing by the chair, the transfer of discontinued chips or tokens by a licensee to another person, regardless of consideration being exchanged, does not qualify as a form of destruction or other disposition under this section. And the last substantive change is to NGC Regulation 12.090, found on page 8. This change provides that promotional chips must be destroyed or otherwise disposed of pursuant to a plan approved by the chair. With that, I conclude my affirmative presentation and be happy to answer any questions board members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGaw. Chief Torgerson, please, if you would comment on the changes and why they're important for us to consider today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So under 12.060 subsection 4B, this is in support of our gaming licensees and to mitigate the number of calls for enforcement division agents. Patrons show identification at gaming tables, they win and don't want to show an identification at the cage when cashing in their chips. They argue that they were already vetted and are a known player. Subsequently, they refuse to show identification at the cage and the cashier refuses to cash them out per their policies and procedures. This regulatory provision really empowers cage employees to follow procedures and require identification before redeeming all chips. It's a nuance that I think will accommodate both, the industry in practice and also our calls for service will be less. And I think it just aids in the transparency of those procedures and what's expected of a patron. 12.070 subsection 2C, we're just really updating the language to allow for modern practices. This method will be annotated in the licensee's redemption plan, which is submitted to the board for approval. So I'm not quite sure exactly what we're going to see instead of newspapers. I would think that, obviously there's signage on property. There's also notifications, on the website for the licensee, maybe at a sister property. Maybe they will even send out correspondence or notifications to their patrons in the Players Club. There would be a variety of ways, but we would evaluate that upon receipt prior to the chair's approval. In 12.090 subsection 2D, it's just to aid in transparency and give appropriate guidance to our licensees. 12.090 subsection 3, we really want to address discontinued promotional chips and tokens are gaming instruments, and their destruction should be governed under the same regulatory provisions as cash value chips. Licensees should not profit from a third-party market on gaming instruments, regardless of their face value.
Very good. Thank you. Do either of my colleagues have any questions for either Mr. McGaw or Chief Torgerson?
Hi, Judge.
Judge Assad.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Dreitzer. On page 6, the 4B, I think you're going to get more calls to the enforcement division if the cashier doesn't want to cash out a patron. I mean, I think the casinos have enough ability to monitor that situation. So, I mean, unless it's a obvious large denomination chip where you have the, what do they call it? The RFID chip, Chandler? Is that what it's called? I mean, if somebody's presenting a $25,000 chip and you don't know who that person is, fine. But, if they're cashing out greens and blacks, and it's impossible to know whether that was the person that actually bought it at the table or not, because they may come back the next day, they may come back after dinner, they may play blackjack, then they go to the crap table and it's far away from the cage. So I don't know how a casino cashier is going to know that is the person that, purchased the chips at the table.
Chandler Pohl for the record. I'd like to thank GCB for doing the revision to this. We've gone back and forth on chips and followed the Supreme Court and the recent regulation changes. And we think 4B is going to be helpful, regardless of dollar amount for the chip, that we may refuse to redeem the chip if the patron or if the guest or the person presenting refuses to provide. We would just ask for one change to the word valid for a valid government issued photo identification.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't carry their license around all the time.
That's correct.
Right. Guy wants to cash out $200, and if he doesn't have a driver's license, you're not going to cash him out.
Well, it is permissive. It's may,
Yeah.
not shall.
Is there a dollar amount? And I don't see where it's, a limit like 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000.
No, we don't have a preference on dollar amount.
Do you think they should have one?
I don't have any comment from MGM on that.
Okay.
Judge, yeah, and I think that B, we're really looking to partner with 4A as kind of an add-on because the licensee shall not redeem its chips or tokens if presented by a person who the licensee knows or reasonably should know did not obtain the chips or tokens directly and lawfully from the licensee's gaming establishment. So there is the standard. And when we're adding on B, we're trying to give them the ability to help identify whether someone was a patron or not. And looking at our calls for service and requests to, go out to properties to help arbitrate these types of engagements and disputes. We find a lot of times advantage players don't want to be identified. Other patrons don't want to be identified. So we're really trying to empower the licensee and protect them to follow the procedures that they have presently at the cage. I don't know that it will change a lot of our calls because we're already getting them. Hopefully this will help mitigate or lessen some, or at least it's in the regulation now. And so cage cashiers can say it's not just our policy, but the regulation says we may. And I think that's where the strength behind this comes in.
I think you're gonna get more calls to the enforcement division. People are gonna say, cash me out. And the cashier says, I need your driver's license. I don't have one. Or I'm from another country. I don't even have my passport with me. Well, why didn't you ask me for that when you let me buy in at the crap table for $1,000?
Well, and
There's
if
a
I,
privacy issue too. I think some people maybe wanna have some degree of anonymity. And then number 5, a licensee shall promptly redeem its chips and tokens if presented. I mean, that kind of contradicts 4 in a way. So anyways, that's all.
yeah, and maybe I can just add one more thing, Judge, that might make more sense too. At the table, they're being identified, right? They're being ID'd because of the policy there to make sure.
More, right?
Well, I'm talking about just their policy based on age and so forth. They're asking for ID. There's an expectation that people have valid ID when they walk into a casino because of that premise, right? So they're asking for the ID at the table, or maybe even they're identifying themselves.
You can
Okay.
buy in for 1,000, 2,000.
And it's not about the buy-in, it's about their age or about looking a certain age, correct?
Casino that does that is Circle.
Well, I think we better be careful. We don't want minors gambling at our tables. So I mean, if someone looks a certain, age, they're going to ID them, right?
Kid, looks
Yeah.
like he's 18, he asked for an ID, but
Your mic's
you
not
got a
on,
50-year-old
Judge.
guy. Oh, I'm sorry. If you have a 50-year-old guy, or 40-year-old guy, I mean,
Sure.
nobody's asking for an ID. when
There's
they
a lot
walk
of
in.
scenarios there. I agree with you. Yeah, we're just trying to give the licensee another tool and a little bit more transparency. And you know what? We might get more calls, like you said, in the future. But I think that we're empowered now, if this reg passes, that we can say this is a regulatory, it's codified, right? And so that does help give them another tool.
The other thing is, I thought you already had that discretion. The cashier can refuse to cash someone out unless usually they would call the pit and say, where'd you play? I played in the blackjack over there, and they call the pit boss. He says, yeah, he's okay, cash him out. But doesn't the cashier still have discretion? I thought it was already enforced.
Chandler Poll for the record. So I forget when that Supreme Court case was. I believe it was 4 or 5 years ago. And that led to the reg change of 4A, or what is now going to be 4A.
Mhm.
And so the reg change says a licensee shall not redeem its chips if presented by a person who the licensee knows or reasonably should know did not obtain the chips or tokens directly. And the Supreme Court identified a few things. One was the use of the word patron, and I forget the other of it. But 4A, as it reads now, has been helpful to the industry, at least for MGM resorts with chip redemptions. We believe 4B, because it's permissive, will be helpful because it's not mandatory. It is a may.
Yeah, I mean, is there much of a difference between those two? 4A and 4B?
Oh, 4A is about knowing that the tokens were directly obtained by the person redeeming, or the chips by the person who is trying to redeem, directly directly obtain those chips from the licensee.
Mhm.
And B is just about the person who's presenting chips.
Mhm.
Can a licensee refuse to cash the chips if that person does not present as we'd like to be a valid government issued photo ID?
And if
Then
you
they're gonna
both,
call enforcement and say, cash me out. The cage won't cash me out.
and I'd like to provide some real scenarios of calls that we've gotten. You know, Supervisor Sullivan can definitely outline maybe a few of those or his philosophy on this, because a lot of this is to help our field services personnel.
And thank you, Chief. Again, Ryan Sullivan for the record. Yeah, one of the problems is this does take a lot of resources. We get a lot of phone calls and a lot of agents have to respond out for these. And we do look for the lawful and direct that help with that language in there, but this would help give our agents in the field something to go by as far as when it comes to the IDs, because when it's a larger amount, like the judge mentioned, there's usually not issues or questions if it's a taxable amount, if it's something that's reportable. But we have a lot of phone calls for $50 in chips, $75 in chips that the licensees are not wanting to redeem without an ID. So that ends up taking time on the phone. A lot of times we'll have to send an agent out there. It ultimately might end up being a dispute investigation because, again, the patron is not willing to provide an ID again. We'll have to do a full investigation and then make our determination, which ultimately usually the patron will be paid if, again, if they obtain those winnings, lawfully and directly. But it is the smaller amounts that they're not currently paying on, and that's the phone calls we're getting. It's usually not taxable amounts. Taxable amounts, usually they're handled. There's really not as much confusion on those or pushback maybe from some of the patrons. It's usually on those smaller amounts that we end up getting involved with that they just don't want to cash out.
And can you address the term valid and inserting that, and what difference that would make for us or the problems that's created industry-wide?
Yeah, and that's why we prefer the government issued and not valid, because we do run into a lot of, again, issues where we have someone that's clearly of age, clearly won on the machine, and because their license or their ID just expired, a week ago or a year ago, or even they're not being paid out. And I think that's a little reason we were kind of wording it the way we did, is if they're clearly the person that won that jackpot and they're clearly of age, it was lawful, there's no questions or concerns regarding it, we're hoping that the licensees will pay the individuals, promptly, like the regulation states. And it usually comes with expired, where they're a lot of times they're even a known patron, but it is expired, so they're not wanting to pay them out, even though it's clearly their jackpot or whatever it happens to be. And we're not talking reportable or taxable amounts. We're talking, again, usually this is smaller payments that they just don't have a valid ID on their person at the time. So they're same thing again. If the licensee refuses, we ultimately could do a dispute investigation. We have up to 45 days to do that. But again, it's just a lot of time and resources for our enforcement agents if we do have to go that path or go that route.
And I remember a scenario, and I don't know that it's common, but we had a licensee that had a player that had been with them for years in the player database. She was an elderly lady. She won, I don't think it was reportable, but she won some money. And with that being said, her driver's license had expired. She was at an age probably to go back to DMV and get that renewed. She may not have gotten that issued. And yet they're taking her money on a regular basis and she should be paid. And so we have that concern with valid. If we can identify that that is the person, and even if it's expired, we'd like to do the government issued. It's just our perspective.
And one more thing too, I think that's created some challenges over the last few years is now with real IDs, there's a lot of different forms of IDs or not IDs. So I think every licensee is a little bit different as far as their own policies and procedures on what IDs they take. But now you have a lot of people with driver authorization cards that used to say not for federal use, and now it's just saying this is not a valid ID. You got the real ID, you got passwords. There's a lot of different forms out there, which is causing, I think, a little bit more confusion. And again, more phone calls to us as far as them maybe having a driver's license, but the licensee is not accepting it because it states on there that this is not a form of ID. And then we kind of get back in the same process again of having to do a dispute for them in order for them to be paid out. And again, sometimes this is on just a small payout.
So I have a question while on this topic for Mr. Pohl. So it's permissive and you say it will help you. So from your perspective, what policy do you think MGM would put in place around this? Let's say it were passed and it's permissive. So how would MGM look at this from a policy standpoint?
From a policy standpoint, Chandler Pohl for the record, from a policy standpoint, I believe it would be primarily used for somebody who brings a significant amount of chips and refuses to present an identification. And that significant amount of chips may be under what otherwise would have required identification, but would be above a nominal amount. So somewhere between ballparking 1,000 to 3,000.
So this helps you to have discretion in those situations.
Right, because without the ID, it's really hard to identify where those chips were obtained.
Okay.
So if the person refuses to be identified, it doesn't allow us to look at, did they directly and lawfully obtain the chips from the licensed gaming establishment?
You just ask them, where'd you play? I played at the crap table right there. They call the pit. The guy says, oh yeah, I see him. He's fine. Or the blackjack table. I mean, you just ask the guy, where'd you play? When did you play? You know.
And sometimes the answer is, oh, I played a year ago,
Well, that's
or I
fine.
played 8 days ago outside of surveillance coverage. And that gets more and more difficult to then go through the records and identify, especially if the person's unwilling to be ID'd.
Right. No, I get that. I just think it's gonna create a lot more calls to our enforcement people.
I don't think that we'll exercise unnecessarily this subsection, this new subsection. I think we'll be judicious in if we do exercise the may right to refuse.
Right.
And the only issue I have with that valid government ID is that if we create two standards, a patron will say, well, you let me cash out chips using expired ID, but now I'm trying to do this other thing and you won't allow me to use an expired ID. Which I'm not sure that is a huge problem as long as the patron, who then eventually might get into a dispute, can then be presented with the regulation and say, no, in this particular reg, it didn't say the word valid, but in this other, it does require it to be a valid ID. But that's more of a patron issue. We would, as a licensee, be able to just cite to the reg and say, expired was okay for this transaction, expired was not okay for this transaction.
Any other questions, Judge Assad?
Nope. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Member Sendall.
Thanks. I appreciate the discussion on this addition to subsection 4 under 12.060. And, you know, I hear the arguments on the valid. I also, you know, maybe just for this instance, right? I think the point is to ensure this person that you're IDing, it is actually indeed that person as well, was my thought. I mean, an expired ID is one thing, but what if it's just somebody else's ID that they're using? But at the end of the day, it says a licensee may refuse to redeem it. So even if they give a valid identification, it might not even be that person's, and you still would have the discretion to deny it if your person, you know, your employee thinks reasonably this person is still suspect. And I go back to is who's going to deny showing their ID if not that there's some sort of nefarious undertone involved here. I'm just trying to think of a scenario where you would just really, really not be willing to show a government issued ID if you want to cash out chips. I mean, it's money, it's cash handling. If you use a credit card, you have to show ID. I think that's a very reasonable expectation in our culture that you have to show ID. If you use a credit card, to me, chips and tokens are almost like another form of check and whatnot. So those are just my comments on that. We'll see where we land. But on the last part, and I appreciate you, Chief Torgerson, kind of explaining what sufficient notice will look like under 12.070 subsection 2C on page 8. I did have a question in that regard, going down to 12.090 on the promotional and tournament chips and tokens. The addition of discontinued promotional chips must be destroyed or otherwise disposed of pursuant to a plan. So just to clarify, historically, we just never required that they submit a plan and we didn't know what was happening with them? Or was there something else that I'm not?
So the promotional chips, because they were no cash value, they were optically looked at as a lesser standard because they didn't have a value, number one. But also based on the changes throughout this reg, we're supporting that and we're asking that, the plan be part of the regular destruction plan for all chips. So that we're categorizing them all together. And also, there are times when there are certain things that are special or commemorative when a property closes. And in lieu of, traditional forms of destruction, they may say, for our executives, we'd like to do some sort of commemorative piece where we put the chips in lucite or we give them a presentation of some sort. And so that could be annotated within this plan, and at the chair's discretion, he can approve that form of destruction if it is something that, he deems appropriate.
Got it. And in line, as you said, with any other sort of chip throughout this Reg 12 section. Okay, I think those are all my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we not say, can a government issued photo ID be valid even if it's expired?
That's interpretive, right? That's the problem.
We certainly can entertain language along those lines if you want that clarity in the provision. Basically saying that this provision would not, a valid ID under this provision, or no, ID under this provision would not be deemed unaccepted if it's expired or something like that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because the idea is certainly you can say this is a driver's license, the day it's valid and then the day after it's valid, it's still a government issued ID. It's just, and it's still valid. It's just expired as a concept.
So you would add the word valid and then say a ID would not be deemed invalid if it was expired.
That would be a potential thought, yes. Because it sounds like the hard luck, quote unquote, cases that are reasonable to consider are ones where it's expired, but it's still a valid driver's license. It's just an expired valid driver's license. I don't know if I'm making this more complicated, but it seems to me we could make that distinction to address those cases that enforcement has concern with, and while at the same time considering the industry's position on that.
What if it's from a foreign country?
It would be a valid if expired or current.
I mean, you're okay with foreign countries?
So
Yes,
I mean, it doesn't say US government yet.
we accept foreign identifications.
So yeah, what I would do is I would propose, and then certainly subject to the view of my my colleagues, but the idea would be that it would be valid, and the fact that it's expired would not render it invalid or something to that effect.
we could do that. We would add the word valid after between and governmental issued photo identification, then add a second sentence to that that says pursuant to this paragraph, a government ID would not be considered invalid if it had expired, or something along those lines is what we're thinking.
And it addresses those concerns we have, and at the same time gives the industry flexibility on that point that they sought. So that's just a potential compromise that I would support.
I would support that too, Chair.
Very good. Mr. Pohl, anything further on this?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you for the insightful testimony. We do appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anybody else here in the audience willing or wishing to speak on the regulation changes to Regulation 12? Discussion. Member Sendall.
I have nothing further. I appreciate the discussion, and input from enforcement staff and Senior Dag McGaw. Thanks.
Judge,
I appreciate the discussion. I have nothing to add.
very good. And I would say that the fact that it's permissive, I would expect that, as indicated, the licensees will use it judiciously. And so for that reason, I would support moving forward with these changes to Regulation 12. So with that, would either of my colleagues care to make a motion?
Yes, Chairman Dreitzer, I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 12 as presented in the draft dated October 17th, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption. To confirm that is the correct draft date, October 17th, 2025. Senior Dag McGaw. Seems old.
The draft date should be 11/12/2025.
That's what I thought I heard you say. Okay, so let me amend that then. I'll amend that I move that the board recommend the proposed amendment to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 12 as presented in the draft dated November 12th, 2025.
And
I'm
Member
so-
Sindall, sorry, just to clarify, with the changes discussed on the record today.
Correct. And then I don't know if you want me to pause on the motion?
Member Sendall, I just wanted to note for the record that the draft that's available to the public is dated October 17th. I did not see a November date on the draft.
So I guess the question would be, is there a difference between those two drafts other than the date?
I'd have to have it. I would have to be able to look at the
So-
October.
Should we
draft
take a
and
minute,
compare.
maybe?
Thank you.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna trail this matter. Although, is Mr. McGaw on the next matter as well, 22?
No.
Senior Dag McKellar.
Very good. So what we'll do is we're gonna trail a motion until after we can ascertain that the two versions were identical. So with that, Madam Secretary, if we could move to the next item for our agenda, please.
Your next item is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission of amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulations 22.060, 22.090, and 22.150 regarding, without limitation, required specific language in book house rules, removal of the chair approval requirement for house rules and parlay card rules, maintenance of prior versions of house and parlay card rules, authorization for the chair to direct amendments to such rules, updates to acceptable sources of outcome reporting, and other matters properly related thereto.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. I believe we have Senior Deputy Attorney General John Michaela, who is here via video conference to make an affirmative presentation. Mr. Michaela.
Thank you, Chair Dreitzer, and good afternoon, Chair Dreitzer, Member Saad, Member Sindall, Madam Secretary. For the record, I'm John Michaela with the Attorney General's Office. Before you today for discussion and possible recommendation to the Commission are proposed changes to Regulations 22.060, 22.090, and 22.150. The draft date of the proposed changes is November 12th, 2025. The proposed changes to Regulation 22.060 update the acceptable sources of outcome reporting for contingencies within events other than who will win and total points scored. The proposed changes replace the acceptable sources of newspapers with reputable national or international media organizations. The new acceptable source would still include newspapers, but would expand this to also include media reporting on the internet. The proposed changes also add a league-designated statistics provider as an acceptable source of outcome reporting. The proposed changes to Regulations 22.090 and 22.150 concerning approval of parlay card rules and house rules would remove the approval requirement and replace it with a maintenance and submission requirement coupled with the ability of the board chair to require amendment of such rules. These proposed changes would maintain oversight of parlay and house rules while reducing the regulatory burden of approving every iteration of such rules. The additional proposed change to Regulation 22.150 sets out required prominent language notifying patrons that house rules are subject to applicable law, notifying patrons that wager rescission is subject to board approval, and notifying patrons of the patron dispute process. These proposed changes do not change the fact that a pass-post wager is void from the beginning and is not a wager at all, as set out in Regulation 22.115. The draft before you today is for possible recommendation of adoption to the Commission. Given that books would be required to amend their rules to include mandatory language, I recommend an effective date of February 28th, 2026, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michaela. Tell me again why you recommend that date. Can you go through that for me, please?
If you look at the proposed changes to Regulation 22.150 subsection 2, it includes mandatory language that must be placed at the front of each book's house rules. And so this would give them time to amend their house rules to include that language rather than the requirement going into effect and the books having to amend their rules by the next day.
Very good. Thank you. With that, Chief Torgerson, could you take us through this regulation change?
Definitely. Thank you, Chair. So for 22060 subsection 5, acceptance of wagers, we're definitely just trying to update the language to reflect industry best practices. The language is a little old and antiquated, and we did get stakeholder input, and it was favorable on these changes. So in order to develop the appropriate terminology, we did use some of their suggestions, and I thank the industry for their input. For 22090 subsection 4, parlay card wagers, the regulation defines the elements needed for a parlay card, and we do no longer feel that it is required for submittal to be approved. Obviously, we will be looking at these when we are inspecting our books and making sure that people are compliant, but we don't feel that a traditional approval is, appropriate any longer. Reinforcing our power, of course, to require the licensee to amend its parlay card rules, the regulation stands, and licensees shall maintain a copy of prior versions of each card for at least 5 years. For 22150 house rules, much of the same. We have formulated earlier this year a race and sportsbook work group, and we've been working on streamlining and standardizing the operator house rules. A lot of our input for these regulatory changes were taken from that group and that work. And I wanted to thank the industry, and a special thank you to Jason McCormick and Michelle Flater of Stations Casino for hosting these discussions and leading the work group. So this language addition did have stakeholder input, and it's favorable, and I'm recommending these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Torgerson. At this time, would either a board member have any questions for either Mr. Michaela or Chief Torgerson? I guess let's start with Member Sendall.
Thank you. No, I discussed these with Chief Torgerson. I don't have any questions. Yeah, thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Judge Assad.
Thank you, Chairman Dreitzer. I don't have any questions.
Very good. Thank you. And I have been working and acting very closely with Chief Torgerson in the creation of this, and with Member Michaela, with Senior Deputy Attorney General Michaela. So I'm in full support of it. Is there anybody from the public wishing to make a comment as to these proposed regulation changes to Reg 22? Well, very good. Seeing none, I think we're ready for an amendment for a motion as to these Reg 22 changes.
Yes, Chairman Dreitzer, I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 22 as presented in the draft dated November 12th, 2025 to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective February 28th, 2026.
Very good. Thank you very much, Member Sendall. Madam Secretary.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Sendall?
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer?
Aye. Thank you very much. Passes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will then return to the matter that was trailed with respect to the proposed changes to Regulation 12. Perhaps for the record, Senior Deputy Attorney General McGaugh, if you could speak to the versioning issue, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair. It should be, we compared the draft of my draft 11/12/2025 with the draft dated 10/17/2025, and there were no differences at all. I must have renumbered internally on my drive and saved it. I never sent it out, so it should be if the motion says draft date October 17th, 2025, that would be correct. And I would for the record, amend my testimony to make sure that I was referring to that draft or that there is no difference between the two.
Thank you for that. So with that said, I believe we are ready for a motion.
Yes, Chairman Dreitzer, I move that the board recommend the proposed amendment to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 12 as presented in the draft dated October 17th, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption.
Thank you, Member Sendall. Madam Secretary.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Sendall?
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer?
Aye. The motion passes. Thank you all very much. With that, Madam Secretary, please read into the record our next item.
Your next item is the discussion and possible recommendation to the Nevada Gaming Commission of amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulations 28.040 and 28.090 in accordance with NRS 463.145, 463.150, and 463.151 regarding without limitation publication of the excluded persons list on the board's website in lieu of distribution, repeal of requirements for licensees to direct excluded persons to leave and to notify law enforcement and the board upon non-compliance, related conforming amendments, and other matters properly related thereto.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I believe as to this matter, we have an affirmative presentation from Senior Deputy Attorney General McGaugh.
Actually, Chair, it's Mike Somps who's going to be presenting this.
Very, very good. I apologize for that. Senior Deputy Attorney General Somps, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members, Madam Secretary. Mike Somps with the Attorney General's office, and I'm prepared to go over the proposed changes to Regulation 28, which of course, as you know, pertains to the list of excluded persons. These changes are contained in a draft dated November 3rd of 2025. Hopefully that is the draft that you're looking at and it's been made available to the public. So there are just a few, thank you. So there are just a few changes. These changes have been initiated by the Enforcement Division. They are generally cleanup and they are designed to match the current practices of the Enforcement Division. I'll just briefly summarize what those are. First, if you look at 28.040, that is regarding the distribution and contents of the list. Provisions in subsection 1 regarding the physical distribution of the list to licensees and law enforcement are deleted, and they are being proposed to be replaced with a requirement that the list simply be published to the board's website. Going on to 28.090, subsection 2, regarding what licensees are obligated to do when an excluded person enters or attempts to enter the licensee's gaming establishment. Provisions requiring the licensee to ask the person to leave or not enter are deleted, and requirements to notify law enforcement and the board if the person refuses are deleted. And so what would remain in subsection 2 is the requirement to simply notify the board of the person's presence. And then we have conforming changes that would be made in subsection 3. Before I finish up, I do want to suggest a further tweak to the language in 28.090 subsection 2 that aren't contained in the draft that you're looking at, but that would conform to the overall changes. I think what would make sense is to delete in that first line, quote, unquote, or attempts to enter, as the deletion of 28.090 sub 2B removes the obligation to ask excluded persons not to enter if they are attempting to do so. So that additional tweak would just make sure the overall regulation makes sense. So those are the proposed changes to Regulation 28. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Chief Torgerson is also available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Before we turn it over to the board for questions, I'd like to ask Chief Torgerson to give her perspective on these changes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, for 28040, as Senior DAG Somps indicated, it's more of a cleanup. Currently, and for years now, we have been distributing the most wanted and the list of excluded persons on our website electronically. We also have a project in the works to aid the industry and the transparency of that information into a downloadable format so they can use that for their systems operationally, and that is in the works. For 28090 subsection 2, duties of a licensee, we're really trying to clarify our guidance to licensees as to our expectations and how they should notify the board and when they should notify the board. This came to me through a stakeholder, a strip property, and because it was a little confusing. Obviously, our intent is to move forward if an excluded person or prohibited person is found on the floor of a licensee's property. We're definitely wanting that identification through the security department, and we're wanting to make sure that there are no false detentions, but that also they follow their protocols and notify the board immediately so we can respond and confirm that and take the appropriate action, as it is a gross misdemeanor.
Thank you very much. One question I had was, what has been the understanding around the term immediately notify? I assume that through the years that has a common understanding with the licensees. What would that be?
Supervisor Sullivan, do you want to talk about that? Because your agents receive those calls.
Yeah, I think as far as immediately, like for example, right now, under 5.055, if there's a 465 crime, they have to notify us immediately. Being that we're 24/7 in enforcement, I would assume that would be a phone call once this happens, where a lot of times we're getting notifications now through emails or later forms, or the following business day. I think on something like this, we'd want to know as soon as possible so we could take appropriate action, whether it's, respond out to the property. And again, if it comes in 3 days later, we're kind of already behind the curve trying to either, track this individual, because it is a gross misdemeanor if they are on property. So we definitely want to try to pursue the criminal element of it.
And I just want to add, although there is some overlap with, allied partners and local law enforcement, this is a gaming crime and it is something that we are 24/7 and we should be responsive to our licensees.
Right now, when we get phone calls for minor on property 24 hours a day. So I don't know why this would be any different for having someone on our excluded list in a property, so we could take appropriate action, immediately, and again, likely send someone out right then and there.
Very good. Well, I think for 2025, this is a very appropriate change and I fully support it. Judge Assad, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Derecha. So it's a gross misdemeanor for that excluded person to be on the licensee's property after they've been duly processed and excluded, right? Is that correct? You said a gross misdemeanor?
Yeah, that is correct, Judge.
So why don't we have security detain them until our enforcement people come on property?
That's
Do
the
we
goal.
do that?
That's the goal, but that's their determination. We have to be really careful because we've had problems in the past where, if we order something and they get ahead of themselves, they may not identify that person properly. And then it's a false detention because they're so excited to do it, right? So we really rely on security protocols. This is just to give them the guidance that once they move through those protocols and they do validly identify this person and they choose to detain that person, yes, to give us a notification will come out.
So they do detain the person sometimes.
They do if they identify that individual as an excluded person. Yes, that is the industry practice.
Okay. Because if they just notify us and let the person go, we're probably not going to get them.
They all know that this is an excluded person, and if they identify that person positively, then that's the practice, and it's general throughout the whole state. Yeah, they're on the lookout for these individuals, and I appreciate their support.
And then are we notifying the district attorney's office to prosecute as a gross misdemeanor, or does the AG's office prosecute?
It would be the district attorney's office with all of our primary crimes. Yeah.
And we're referring them over there?
It would be a case, and we would have the arrest, and yeah.
Are they prosecuting them?
They're doing pretty well. I mean, you may have more information than I do at this point, Ryan, but I think that we've opted for support, and I have a contact that meet monthly, and we try to generate that support. It's important to us.
Yeah, I think we're going in the right direction with that as far as getting prosecution with them. But that's also why it's a little bit nicer to be notified immediately, because if we can go out and make a PC, a probable cause arrest, right then and there, I think we're gonna have better success than, again, going back, doing an initial investigation, or doing an investigation, trying to track them down, and then having to submit an affidavit for, months down the road, getting that potential arrest warrant. So I think it's actually will be more successful if we're able to go out there. If they get detained, or if we did end up getting to be able to take them to jail, then and there, it's definitely the best route to go.
Great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Judge Assad. Member Sendall.
Thank you. I had an opportunity to meet with Chief Torgerson and discuss this yesterday. I understand the changes. I think they're, more modern day as far as, publishing on the board's website and what's included. And I understand the need for the revision, the proposed amendment that Dag Som stated. And I support these recommended reg amendment changes, and I don't have any further comments or questions at this time.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Pohl, would you care to speak on Reg 28 changes?
Yeah, Chandler Pohl for the record. I just wanted to clarify the detention. Under the current reg, the licensee's duty is to request the excluded person to leave the premises. So now is there an expectation that the licensee will detain the excluded person, or just immediately notify?
Sorry. That's what I was trying to get at. I needed some clarification. I'm glad you raised that point.
So we're talking about the language here and how that's painting that picture. Correct. Yeah, I think what we were concerned with is, requesting the excluded person to not enter, or if, yeah, of course, you're going to turn them away if they're outside your brick and mortar and you catch them coming in, right? Because they're not allowed on premise. So that's an understandable thing. And I think security departments have those protocols in place. I could be wrong, but in speaking with my corporate security group, that seems to be clear. Or if on the premises, to immediately leave. That's where the concern came in. They were asking me, well, don't you want us to detain that person? And you want them to ask him to leave? And I was like, if you can identify that he's a prohibited person and he's on your premise, I would like you to follow your protocols. And if you can identify him, then yes, detain him. But I can't order that. And I don't want to order that through a reg, because there's a lot of scenarios there. There's a lot of training issues with some properties and security departments. So I really try to defer to the protocols set in place. And we need to be careful with the language.
Okay, Chandler Pohl for the record, thanks. I'm not familiar with all of our security protocols, but if those conversations have been had, I'm sufficed.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anybody else interested in making a comment about Regulation 28? Seeing none? Member Sendall, I believe we are ready for a motion.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Dreitzer. I move that the board recommend the proposed amendments to Nevada Gaming Commission Regulation 28 as presented in the draft dated November 3rd, 2025, incorporating the changes discussed on the record today to the Nevada Gaming Commission for its consideration and adoption to become effective upon said adoption.
Thank you, Member Sendall. Madam Secretary.
Member Assad?
Aye.
Member Sendall?
Aye.
Chairman Dreitzer?
Aye. The motion passes. Before we move to public comment, I do want to take a moment to thank Chief Torgerson and her staff, in particular Supervisor Sullivan, Supervisor Nickel, for presenting today, and all the hard work you did to get all of these very important reg changes on before us. So we do appreciate all your hard work. Similarly to Mr. McGaugh, Mr. Somps, Mr. Michaela, Ms. Lawrence, and the team at the Attorney General's office were very appreciative of your work in being able to support this. And then last but never least, I do want to give a very special thank you to the Senior Research Specialist for the Nevada Gaming Commission, Mr. Jose Torres, who was absolutely indispensable in helping us prepare for today, as well as for the hearing on the 16th. And we want you to know, Mr. Torres, we really appreciate your support of us as we transition in terms of personnel involved with this. So thank you very much. With that, Madam Secretary, let's proceed with public comments.
This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members ask questions of the speaker, the time needed to address those questions will not count against the speaker's 3-minute time period. If speakers have any handouts or written copies of verbal comments to provide for the record, please hand them to the enforcement agent in the room.
Very good. Let's start in Carson City. Is there anyone wishing to make a public comment? If so, please step to the podium and state your name for the record. Seeing none, is there anyone in Las Vegas here with us today wanting to make a public comment? If so, please step to the podium and state your name for the record. Seeing none, that will close our public comment section, thus concluding our workshop for today. Thank you all to those who participated. I think it was an excellent workshop, and we look forward to continuing this process in due course. Thank you all very much.